Let the torch of freedom burn.
Preserving and passing the torch of freedom. That's what we do here at Wallbuilders Live. Welcome to the intersection of faith and the culture. We're so glad you're with us today. We've got a great program lined up for you today. It's Good News Friday, and of course, I love Fridays. You know this. I love the encouragement of knowing there's victories happening all over the place. We often talk on my Front Porch Live on Sunday nights about the good, the bad, and the ugly of what's going on. We cannot ignore the good. You know, too often we get focused on the bad and the ugly, all the things that are going wrong. It gets us depressed. We don't get engaged. We don't stay involved. That's the wrong path. We got to look at all of it. So we're eyes wide open. We know what's happening, but at the same time, we see some of that good, and we know that these principles work every time that they're tried, as Bob McEwen would say. My name is Rick Green. I'm a former Texas legislator and America's Constitution coach, and I'm here with David Barton, America's premier historian and our founder at Wallbuilders, and also with Tim Barton, national speaker and pastor and president of Wallbuilders. We're going to be sharing a lot of good news with you today. There is more at our website, so be sure and check that out at wallbuilderslive.com. That's wallbuilderslive.com. That's also where you can get archives of the program, and you can make a contribution. Yep, end of the year, getting close to the end of the year anyway, just a couple of weeks left. This is the time to make those tax-deductible donations towards the end of the year, and we would greatly appreciate your support at wallbuilderslive.com. Easy to do. Just click on the button, make the donation. You can sign up for a monthly donation if you like, or just do a one-time at the end of the year donation. Thank you to all of you across the country that have already been doing that, and thank you for those of you that are thinking about doing it today. wallbuilderslive.com is the place to go for that. All right, David and Tim, let's dive into that good news. David Barton's up first. What's the first piece of good news for this week?
I'm going to go back a year or so to the Trump administration, and I've got here a thing that more than 6 conservative groups sent a letter to key media stakeholders urging more balanced coverage of the 45th president. They condemn what they call the pervasive pattern of underreporting and negative bias toward the actions and agenda of this administration. And they conclude, please consider and swiftly address your role in promoting this widespread destructive pattern of reporting. Not only is it doing harm to our democracy, it's harming your reputation as journalist and that of the news outlets you represent. Now, I said that and I got it wrong. It really was not written about Trump. This is something that just happened with liberal groups talking about the media not being fair to Biden. They're criticizing Biden. This sounds like something out of the Trump administration. It doesn't sound like something out of the Biden administration because the media has been so liberal for so long. The good news is they're just not carrying water for Biden like liberals want them to do.
Now, let me pause for a second. They are carrying a lot of water for Biden, a ridiculous amount, but it's just that when you're in the Titanic and it's going down, there's only so much bailing of water you can do. And they're going, guys, you got to make us look better. And they're going, we're doing everything we can right now. It's so much so that a lot of what the news media is doing is ridiculous. And that's why the news media's trust is so low in the ratings. People don't trust the news media because they're so dishonest and they're disingenuous in what they say. Right? I mean, the reason the Let's Go Brandon thing became a thing was because you're literally listening to people chant this derogatory thing about Joe Biden, and the reporter talking to this NASCAR driver says, wow, Brandon, look, they're cheering you on. They're saying, let's go, Brandon. And you're literally hearing them say something totally different about Joe Biden in the background. People have just lost the notion of trust in the media. But yeah, it's a great irony that the Biden administration is saying, guys, you're giving us negative coverage. This isn't right. You're supposed to cover for us, which also tells you that the news media has become much more the propaganda wing of the Democrat Party than an actual journalist organization.
But Tim, I don't know that you're being fair because I think that the liberals are being treated exactly the way Trump said, because that's what the Washington Post said. The Washington Post just had an article about how the liberals are being treated just as badly as conservatives. Oh, liberal. That I kind of guess the Washington Post is kind of liberal, so maybe we don't trust that. Here's what they said. They said 200,000 articles from 65 different outlets showed that there's been as many negative articles about Biden as there were about Trump back in 2020. So it is just, it's ironic and hilarious, as you point out, Tim, that they're really complaining now about getting the same treatment that Trump got, and it's not the same treatment because they're still covering for it. But it's just, I know this is kind of a snarky, but it's good news that the Biden administration is upset because they feel like the press is not covering for them enough.
And we know when they do cover for them, it's hard to get that truth to most of the American people, and they tend to completely fall for a lot of the propaganda out there. So it's actually a big deal. That's why they're upset. They know that's an important plank for them. Without that cover by the media, their lousy agenda doesn't work so well. All right, Tim, what's your piece of good news? First piece of good news today.
Well, this one is coming out of Wisconsin, and recently there was a very intensive audit done. It was done by the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, and they went through tens of thousands of ballots. And so here's the headline: Wisconsin investigation finds illegal votes, but no widespread election fraud. So there is good news that there wasn't widespread election fraud. Now, when you get into the details, there's a lot of interesting things in the details of this, like the fact that Facebook co-founder, CEO Mark Zuckerberg and his wife donated millions of dollars to go and run ads and to sway opinion of people in Wisconsin. So there definitely was a lot of election interference when you get into the big tech, when you get into social media, when you get into the Googles and the different things where they were censoring information, they were limiting information. There was a lot of interference. But when it comes to the actual ballots, and this is a big deal because there's a lot of questions right now. People are doubting the election process. Can we even trust it anymore? Because isn't the whole thing rigged? Well, there is a lot of rigging on some level, but it might not be as pervasive as we thought with actual ballots. And I know there's a lot of people, questioning Dominion and these various things. To this point, what we can say, and this is from an extensive investigation and from a conservative public interest law firm in Milwaukee, they had a 10-month investigation. And now it's worth noting, they did find in Wisconsin, Joe Biden won by nearly a 21,000 vote margin. They did find that there were enough illegal ballots that would have changed or would have covered that margin of difference. But looking at all the ballots in general, they said we do think we found that Joe Biden did win more votes than Trump did, but there were enough illegal ballots that were cast that do surpass that 21,000 vote margin of victory. They went into the process of where there was a lot of problems with the changing of kind of legal process, and it was more of a process issue than necessarily just these illegal votes being cast. It also did make me, as I was reading the article, it made me wonder if you're saying there's not widespread election voter fraud, but there was enough voter fraud that it surpassed the number of votes that Biden won by. Like, isn't that widespread enough? So I think when you're talking about millions of people voting and you're talking about a couple tens of thousands of voter fraud, that's why it's a very small percentage of the number of votes that were cast. So it's not widespread in that sense. So the good news is, in the midst of this, investigations are happening. Information is being brought to light. And even though it's not going to change the outcome of what happened in this last presidential election, it can bring enough information to light that people can pressure their states and their state legislative bodies, their election officials, statewide office holders to say, hey, we need to fix and kind of solidify, cure up where we've had problems and where election fraud can take place. And so that's something happening in Wisconsin. That this evidence is coming out. People are able to see what happened. So there is good news that there is investigations happening that in this case, again, no widespread voter fraud. And I would encourage people, if they're interested, this is an Epoch Times article. They can go look this up. It does dive into the details and give some very good information of what the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty found as they released their report. So a lot of information, but I do think there are some positive takeaways that as we're seeing people getting involved in states and people getting involved in school boards or city councils, local elections, part of the things that we can do once we've seen where there have been problems in these states where it did allow for a level of voter fraud or election fraud to take place, that you can do things like what happened in Texas or Georgia or Florida, where they go in and they change those laws to make sure that fraud can't happen those same ways in future elections. There is some good news from this coming out of Wisconsin.
Let me add that this is either the 6th or the 7th state where we've seen this report. All these other states where they've gone in and done a similar analysis of ballots, and they've come back and said, yeah, there were more illegal votes cast than the margin of difference. Now, that doesn't mean every legal vote would have been cast for Biden or whoever. But what happens is it turns out that we're not yet finding anything that says it's the machines. It's the laws that are not being enforced is what it is. And so that was what they found here in Wisconsin. And let me just point to something that had changed in Virginia. We mentioned that election night in Virginia, but I'm going to mention it again. In Virginia, you had the same laws they've been having. You had a Democrat governor, Democrat election officials across the state. But what happened was a whole bunch of churches, particularly independent Baptist churches, said, hey, we've got 1,300 people here. We want trained as poll watchers, and we also want them as certified election officials. And so about 300 of them got trained as election officials, which means they had the ability to challenge a ballot and say, whoa, the law says that you got to have your last 4 Social Security digits on the ballot, and that's not there. You got to throw the ballot out. Well, there was a lot of officials not throwing those ballots out. They were just taking and counting everything. And so when you had people starting to challenge to say, follow the law, follow the law, follow the law, they found that up to 7.25% of those ballots had real problems that they could be legally challenged. And so when you throw that kind of percentage out, now you're looking at the margin of election difference that allowed Youngkin to win over McAuliffe in that race because you're following the law. It's not the machines were doing something weird. And see, this is the thing. Americans have been debating, why should I ever vote again? Because the machines, I'll never beat the machines. So far, we're not finding it's machines you have to beat. We're finding you just have to follow the law. And so we just need more good guys saying, hey, I want to be a poll watcher. I want to make sure the laws are being followed. I want to become an election official for the election. Just get in and make sure the laws are being followed. And so far, that's what we're seeing in these. It's either 6 or 7 states that have come to the same conclusion, and they've done very extensive analysis of the votes. And it was everything from machine cast votes to mail-in ballots to early voting to everything else. We just need more people involved and being in part of the process to put eyes on the process and make sure the laws are being followed.
All right, guys, quick break. We'll be right back. We've got more good news. Stay with us, folks. You're listening to Wallbuilders Live.
Hey guys, we want to let you know about a new resource we have at Wall Builders called The American Story. For so many years, people have asked us to do a history book to help tell more of the story that's just not known or not told today, and we would say very providentially in the midst of all of the new attacks coming out against America, whether it be from things like the 1619 Project that say America is evil and everything in America was built off slavery, which is certainly not true, or things like even the Black Lives Matter movement, the organization itself, not the statement Black Lives Matter, but the organization that says we're against everything that America was built on, and this is part of the Marxist ideology. There's so many things attacking America. Well, is America worth defending? What is a true story of America? We actually have written and told that story, starting with Christopher Columbus, going roughly through Abraham Lincoln. We tell the story of America not as the story of a perfect nation or a perfect people, but the story of how God used these imperfect people and did great things through this nation. It's a story you want to check out. Wallbuilders.com, The American Story.
We're back here on Wallbuilders Live. It's Good News Friday. Thanks for staying with us. We got a lot more good news coming your way, and the next piece of good news goes to David.
Rick, the one I've got is on the Biden immigration policy. And while there are a lot of problems we got with the Biden immigration policy, here is one that says overwhelmed Biden to restart Trump's Remain in Mexico policy. So we now find out that the Biden administration is going back to what Trump did with the Remain in Mexico policy. Haven't heard much about that in the news. Can you imagine Biden going back to something that Trump actually did in immigration? That's what this headline is.
Well, actually, guys, the top of my next stack is dealing with the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, who are the ones who came and said, hey, you, President Biden, right, Biden administration, you actually need to do something going back to this original policy. And guys, I don't know if y'all actually read any of this 117-page opinion. I did not, except for what's in this article. This is very interesting to me. So when they came down with this ruling, and this ruling is just, I mean, this was the middle of December. So this is not that long ago when this ruling came, which doesn't really solve the crazy immigration issues we saw all year long, with estimates are over 2 million people coming across the southern border. It's lots and lots of issues. There's a reason, Dad, when your article headline talked about Biden being overwhelmed or the administration being overwhelmed by the issue on the southern border. Absolutely true. Here's what's crazy is the ruling, the decision came back saying the Department of Homeland Security, it claims the power to implement a massive policy reversal affecting billions of dollars and countless people simply by typing out a new Word document and posting it on the internet. No input from Congress, no ordinary rulemaking procedures, and no judicial review. The DHS has come nowhere close to shouldering its heavy burden to show that it can make law in a vacuum. And this is part of the 170
Spot
page.
on. He is spot on. You can't just make up law because you type a Word document.
Yeah,
That's
just because
great.
you made a new Word document and posted it online doesn't mean that now this is the new law. It's not how that works. So it's very fascinating when they came back and said that, right, when go back to when Biden was sworn into office in January 2021, and when, right, that's when he's sworn in. Okay, I feel like time has just stood still for the last 2 years. So I can't even remember. Has it only been 1 year with him as president? Because it feels like forever. Anyway, so in January 2021, this policy, the Remain in Mexico policy, was in place. And the policy, the short of it is that people that were seeking asylum, they would have to stay in Mexico until they were approved for asylum. And the White House with the Department of Homeland Security, they were just letting people come in and then turning them loose and show up later for a court date, whatever else. That's why the system was so overwhelmed. And I'm saying system loosely. I don't think we really had a system in place for the southern border, but that's why the southern border was so overwhelmed. And even now we're seeing issues. We're seeing conflict in Mexico with these massive caravans, having conflicts with police officers. And it's these policies are making it bad in other nations as well. But it is really good news that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals said to the Department of Homeland Security, you can't just arbitrarily remove these policies by writing a new Word document. That's really good information, and it has put the Biden administration in a place where it's requiring them to go back to this Remain in Mexico policy that was the way it was under Trump, and to this point, it looks like that's still the way it is.
Well, let me jump in right on the tail of that, Tim, because talking about judges and Biden policy, we all know what's been going on with Biden's policy on the vaccination mandate. And part of that policy said, look, if you're a healthcare system that gets either Medicaid or Medicare, in other words, you get federal dollars, and you got more than 100 employees, everybody's got to be vaccinated. That's a federal requirement. If you're getting federal dollars, everybody's got to be vaccinated. So what happened, we've talked before, there's been more than a dozen rulings that have struck down some aspect of that, some for the military and some for private business owners, et cetera. But here's one that came out of Louisiana. Federal Judge Terry Doughty ruled that policy that relates to hospitals, and by the way, that policy, the hospitals that take Medicaid and Medicare employ 10 million workers. So you've got 10 million healthcare workers now under that policy. You have to get vaccinated, and about a third of those folks refuse to get vaccinated. You know, they're just not going to do it. And so the judge struck down that policy, and I love what he said, and it sounds just like that he got together with the judge you were just quoting, Tim. He says, quote, if the executive branch is allowed to usurp the power of the legislative branch to make laws, two of the three powers conferred by our Constitution would be in the same hands. If human history and nature teach anything, it is that civil liberties face grave risk when governments proclaim indefinite states of emergency. During a pandemic such as this one, it is even more important to safeguard the separation of powers set forth in our Constitution to avoid the erosion of our liberties. So again, it's the same point. The legislature didn't do this, and the president can't come in and make law just because he wants to do something. So here you have a federal judge again doing this. Now, here's where the interesting part came out with the free market, because this is also a good news story, not about judges, but about free market. These 1/3 or so of the healthcare workers that did not want to get vaccinated, what did they do? They left all these systems that are requiring it, and they went to systems that didn't require it. And so what happened, these guys that refused to get vaccinations in the public hospital sector, many of them went to the private hospital sector, and they were readily hired there. And so it's taken so many workers out of the public hospital sector that the free market is now catching the public hospital sector, and the public hospital sector is saying, well, guess what? We're not going to require vaccinations anymore. You don't have to be vaccinated to work here. So it really is driving the free market is driving both the public and the private system right now.
And let's point out that's certainly not the case for all public hospitals, because in California and New York, there's certain places that they're requiring, and I mean, even in Texas, there's hospitals in Texas that are requiring that vaccine mandate, but you are seeing allowances for different kinds of exemptions, where before they were very strict, no exemptions, and then all of a sudden they lose their workers. They're like, we'll take your exemptions now. We were kidding. Please come back. And there are some hospitals that are saying, hey, we're removing all mandates whatsoever. We're not going to require you to do this, which, of course, go back to when the pandemic was at its height. none of when there was not a vaccine, none of these people were vaccinated, and they're putting their lives in line every single day, going to help serve and save lives. And now you're telling them that we're not going to give you the same opportunity, the same privilege. We won't. Where you were heroes a year ago, you are now going to be villainized and kicked out on the street. You're going to be fired and lose your job. It's utterly insane. But that was what was happening. But that, as you pointed out, the free market, people actually leaving some of those businesses. And when they left, said that we've seen hospitals put in such a difficult scenario that we've seen governors actually call in National Guard to have people come and work in the hospitals to try to keep the hospitals open. Well, guys, there's a really good solution that you don't have to call in the National Guard. Just remove the silly vaccine mandate, because most of these employees, the nurses, the doctors, they want to be there. That's the reason they got involved in the medical industry.
Why is it that so many nurses and doctors don't want to take the vaccination? I mean, guys who work in the healthcare industry, could it be that they're not comfortable with this mandate and with what's happening? Maybe there's something there.
I think you guys just aren't. I think you're not taking this serious enough. I mean, especially this Omicron variant. I mean, this thing, guys, it causes muscle soreness. I mean,
so does basketball and football and chainsaws.
Let's clarify
for a couple of days. Not just a few minutes, for a couple of days possibly. Now, it hasn't killed anybody. Now, Boris says there's one death in the UK, and maybe that's true. I have a heart, but millions have had it. And even if there's one death, we had 99,999 more people than that die from snake bites, and 1,499 die from swallowing chicken bones and fish bones. So
at this point, the Omicron variant is as deadly to people as Alec Baldwin. Although,
too soon?
Although,
in
in fairness, we don't know how many people Alec Baldwin actually has killed. We just know about the one.
Yeah, it is. I mean, think about it, guys. It is a variant that's actually a gift. I think God's given us a gift here. Such minor symptoms, and yet potentially natural immunity to all variants. And so it could be a really good thing, and yet the president wants to shut down travel to 8 countries. They want to go back to locking down and all of these things. It just seems like we said there was no common sense and logic and science before, but this just seems unbelievable.
Well, let me throw one in here, Rick. This one is surprising. It's Democrat Governor Jared Polis.
Yeah.
And he has declared the lockdown is over in very blue Colorado. And I would like to summarize what he said, but I'm not.
More than that, he said the pandemic is over.
He said it's over. I'm just going to read you what he said when he announced this, because this is absolutely amazing. He says, everybody has had more than enough opportunity to get vaccinated. Hopefully, it's been at your pharmacy, your grocery store, a bus near you, or big events. At this point, if you haven't been vaccinated, it's your own darn fault. He said the emergency is over. Public health officials, they don't tell people what to wear. That's not their job. Public health officials would always say to wear a mask because it decreases the flu and it decreases other airborne illnesses, but that's not something that you require. You don't tell people what to wear. You don't tell people to wear a jacket when they go out in winter and force them to wear it. If they get frostbite, it's their own darn fault. If you haven't been vaccinated, that's your choice. I respect that. But it's your fault when you're in the hospital with COVID. You mean we get to be responsible for our own decisions and the government's not making? I can't imagine. And I can't imagine this came from a blue governor, Jared Polis of all. But man, that's amazing.
It tells you if they're like you said, if it's a blue governor that's doing this. Now, frankly, I think a lot of red governors should have already said exactly what he's saying. But the fact that he's saying it tells you the momentum is shifting. I mean, it's people are just fed up with the nonsense.
Well, it's shifting also politically because they did redistricting in Colorado, and it's very plausible that you're going to see the trifecta completely busted up, Democrat trifecta, which means Democrat Senate, Democrat House, Democrat governor. There's a really good chance that has gone by the way in Colorado. Redistricting really has turned that state in a very much more red direction. This may not be a blue state much longer. It may become actually a purple state on its way back to red.
Well, guys, a lot of good news today, but I think my favorite piece of good news is that you can't make law with a Word document. I mean, maybe if you combine it with Obama's pen and a phone and the Word, I don't know, is it a special trifecta you got to have?
It's just remarkable that you're hearing the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals hold the Department of Homeland Security accountable for literally trying to legislate. They're not Congress. They're legislating with a Word document posted online. Okay, it's brilliant. Again, I didn't read the 117-page decision. Whoever wrote that, I applaud. Absolutely, that is correct. And Dad, even with the one that you followed up with, where the judge said that we can't allow that federal government to be kind of a microcosm down to one institution or one individual having the power of what should be a separation of powers. Guys, we are seeing on a lot of levels the restoration of a separation of powers, the restoration of the 10th Amendment, a restoration of some basic constitutional principles. There's some good news happening in this nation.
All right, folks, as we said earlier, you can get more good news at our website, wallbuilderslive.com. Check that out today. As we're going into the end of the year, I want to ask you to consider that donation, wallbuilderslive.com, to make that donation. And also consider thinking about right now what you're going to do in 2022 to help restore America's constitutional republic. You can be a host of one of our Constitution classes. That's a great way to do it. You can just simply share links to our website, to the radio program, to all the different programs at wallbuilders.com. Lots of things you can be doing in 2022. Start thinking now. Start praying for God to put those things on your heart and get ready to take action starting January 1, 2022. It's going to be a big year for restoring liberty across this great land, and we want you to be at the forefront of it. You can be the catalyst for restoring biblical values and constitutional principles right there in your community. Go to biblicalcitizens.com today to sign up for free as one of our Constitution coaches and start hosting that biblical citizenship class in your community. I think the most fun way to do it is in your own home, right? Bring people over to your living room. It's a great time for fellowship. The videos are fantastic. Everyone will be encouraged. They'll be given hope. But when the video ends, that's where the magic begins. That's where the conversation, looking across the room and realizing you're not alone. There are others that care about these things as well. You can be the one to make all that happen. Go to biblicalcitizens.com today. Thanks so much for listening to Wallbuilders Live.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting.